Hi, this is part 2 of our demonstration video where we are looking at an example question called We Do It Right and Incorporated, and we are using this question, and in this question we are going to prepare a process costing account using the first in first out method. So here we have the question, and we would have read through the question in our part 1 video. So we are now going to be using the equivalent units table in order to calculate our equivalent units for each cost element. Remember, our cost elements in this question will be process 1 material, added material, labor, and production overhead. So we have to calculate the equivalent units for opening inventory, fully completed units, and closing inventory. So we're going to have here our raw units. So what are our raw units for opening inventory? Based on the question, our opening inventory raw units is 450 units. Our closing inventory raw units are 400 units. But we do not know our fully completed units, and I will show you how to calculate that using one of the formulas we would have looked at previously. So our raw units for opening inventory, 450, and for closing, 400 units. But how will we calculate our fully completed units? Because the question does not tell us what our fully completed units are. So here we have two formulas to calculate fully completed units. One, we can take our input units and subtract our closing inventory units. And the other one, we can take our output units and subtract our opening inventory units. So let's see which of these formulas we would use. In the question, they did give us output units. No. They did give us opening inventory units. Yes. So we don't have output units, but we have opening inventory units. So therefore, we cannot use the output units minus the opening inventory units formula in order to calculate our fully completed units. However, we were given closing inventory units and our input units of 2750 because they said during May 2008, 2,750 units were transferred from process 1 to process 2. So that means the 2,750 units are our input units. So we can use our input units and subtract our closing inventory units to get our fully completed units. So fully completed units will be 2,750 units minus 400 units. So let's see how much our fully completed are. 2,750 minus 400. So our fully completed units are 2,350 units, raw units. So now let's look at calculating equivalent units for our cost element. So we have process 1 material, added material, and we also have labor and production overhead. So what about our process 1 material? Here it tells us that the 450 units that we started with at the beginning, these were 100% complete with respect to process 1 material. In other words, it means when it comes to process 1 material, we don't need any more material to complete these 450 units. So therefore, the degree of completion that still needs for process 1 will be 0, because we don't need any more process 1 material. So that is 0%. And there are no units, obviously, then there won't be any equivalent units. So let's look at that. So there's 0% with respect for our process 1. So our equivalent units will be 450 units multiplied by 0, obviously give us 0 as our equivalent units for process 1. What about added materials? What is the percentage or degree that we need with respect to added materials in order to complete these 450 units? The question stated 60% that the 450 units were 60% complete with respect to added material. So the 450 units that we're starting with in May already has 60% of the added materials. It means in order to complete these 450 units in this period that is under review, we need another 40% to complete them. So let's look at that. So we have 40% would be our that is needed to complete these 400. So what is our equivalent units? So that will be 450 multiplied by 40, which gives us, that's incorrect calculation, 450 multiplied by 40%, which is 180 equivalent units. What about labor and production overhead? The question stated, in addition, they also require 10% of labor and 10% of production overhead to be completed. In other words, remember, labor and production overhead combined is our conversion cost. So therefore, they need an additional 10% of our conversion cost in order to complete these 450 units. So it will be 10% with respect to labor, 10% with respect to production overhead. So let's see what our equivalent units are when we look at with respect to labor and production overhead. So that is 10% and 10% for production. So the cost element here is labor, and then this cost one is production overhead. So that will be 450 units multiplied by 10%, which is 45 equivalent units. And obviously, it's the same 45 equivalent units here as well, because it's the same 10%. Now, when it comes to our fully completed units, these units were the units that were started and finished during the period. So if they have been started and finished, and they, as the terms say, fully completed, it means that they don't need any more process 1 material. They don't need any added material, any labor, any production overhead. It means that these units are 100% complete with respect to these fully completed units would need 100% of the process 1, 100% of the added materials, labor, and production overhead. So again, let's look at that. They will need, for the fully completed, for them to be fully completed, they will need 100% of process 1, added material, labor, and production overhead. So our percentage here is 100%. So therefore, 100% times the raw units will give us 2350 equivalent units. 100% with respect to added material, 2350. 100% with respect to labor, and 100% with respect to production overhead. So whenever it comes to our fully completed unit, it is always 100% with respect to all the cost elements. So just bear this in mind. when it comes to fully completed unit, it is always 100% needed with respect to all the cost elements: the process one material, the added material, the labor, and the production overhead. So obviously, when you multiply the 2350 by 100%, you will get equivalent units of the same 2350. So this one should be very easy for everybody to complete because it's the same thing right across. But now let's look at our equivalent units for closing inventory. Now, when it comes to closing inventory, it tells us that there were 100%, it contains 100% of the process one material. So they contain 100% of process one material. And remember, when we are looking at closing inventory, remember we are looking at what was already completed and not what still needs to be done. So here it is 100% has been completed. So therefore for process one, our percentage will be 100%. It says that it also contains 50% of the added material. So it means that these 400 units were already completed with 50% of added material. So our percentage there is added for added material will be 50%. And then they stated, however, these units still needed 40% of labor and production overhead. So here we are not looking at how much they need, but how much was already in these 400 units with respect to labor and production overhead. So if they still need 40%, it means that they already had 60% of the labor and the production overhead. So here, our 400 closing inventory units are 100% complete with respect to, they already have all the process one material. So 100% times 400, 400. They have 50% of the added material. So 400 times 50% is 200 equivalent units. And we established that they still need 60% of the labor and production overhead in order to get these to the completion. Rephrasing that. We already established that they have 40%, that they still need 40% of the labor and production overhead to complete, which means that they already have 60% of the labor and the production overhead in these 400 units. So 60%, so that would be 400 times 60%, 240 equivalent units. And obviously for production it will be the same thing. Calculation error here. So I already had my formulas in, and you can see here that I have total my equivalent units. So for my total equivalent units for process one material is 2,750 units. For added material, 2,730 units, 2,730 units. For labor and production overhead, equivalent units are 2,635 units for both of them. So after we would have completed our step one of calculating the equivalent units of the cost elements by using this table, then what we are going to do is our step two, where we are going to compute the cost per equivalent unit. So when we come back in our next video, we are going to look at step two and computing the cost per equivalent unit. So stay tuned for the completion of this question here, where we will be looking at our step two and then moving forward into our other steps until we get to complete our process two account. So again, like this video and subscribe to this channel. Thank you.